happens. All right.
See, as soon as you said that, Jenny.
I know.
So y'all see me now. Here I am. All right. Well, hey, here we are. Coffee with the Founder today. Next up, we have our good friend and colleague, Kathy Obear. Top of the morning to you.
Good morning, Dr. Moore.
We're doing these little interviews, these conversations, asking folks, are giving our folks an opportunity really to get to know the people who are part of the WPC family. And I can't think of a better person that's been with us for quite a while. And so today is our day to get to know you a little bit. And let's start by you just sharing. If I meet you on the bus, at the bus stop on the corner of the street, and I say, who are you? Who's Kathy Obear? What do you do? What's your work? What's your expertise? How would you answer that?
You know, in that scenario, I'd probably say, you know, I'm a white person that is deepening, hopefully, their capacity to work with folk of color and other whites to dismantle racism and other forms of oppression. I've been on this journey a long time, and I got a long way to go. But most any and everything I do in the world is really focused on creating liberation, dismantling oppression, and particularly working with whites to do that. And when I share that on airplanes or in corners, particularly with folk of color, I mean, it's not the first thing I say in a taxi, but we usually end up having a great conversation about racism and whiteness and white privilege. And so that's who I am, in addition to living in Denver with my wife and our 2 cats and a kitten, and in our 5th week of sheltering in place.
Yeah, so what I wonder is, did you grow up thinking this is what I love to do when I become an adult? I mean, how did this journey, this evolution happen? When people ask you how you got into the work, how do you talk about that or explain that, share that with folks?
I grew up in a family that, as I look back, had clearly very coded racist messages and actions and very blatant jokes once I finally realized what they were. I fell into this work. I wanted to be a teacher. I kind of stumbled into college administration at a time when they were doing diversity training, and I just found a love and a niche. And I kind of mentioned race, but I was really focused on sexism and heterosexism. And I kind of fell into consulting and training because people asked me to come do a workshop. I'm like, oh, this is fun. So it really wasn't. I'm actually writing about this in my next book. I'm doing a book for people that want to lead white accountability spaces. Literally this morning, I was writing about how I was in a consulting group that did racism, sexism, and then they added heterosexism off of very responsive reactions to my probably demanding white supremacist demands. And I was in that and got to experience very clear feedback for very public and blatant racist actions. And I'd been hiding, and I thought I was doing pretty well teaching about racism. And then they said, 1997, no, these are your racist actions. Your competence is so low on race. We need you to quickly develop. And I just was devastated and frightened. And that's when SJTI, we decided to focus on race and racism. And so, to be honest, it's been really through working with many of our dear friends and colleagues in common, Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, Vernon Wald, Dr. Becky Martinez, and then all the people there, that I got a huge boost in my awareness and skill. And then all the white caucuses I got to facilitate. And then the work I got to do at White Privilege and the learning there from all the great people you have coming, the participants that continue to challenge and nudge me. So long answer to no, I was and can quickly fall into the typical well-meaning white person that doesn't think about race, think about our marginalized identities.
So in your day-to-day journey, I mean, if I'm wondering, like, do you encounter more white people that are willing to do this work in an oblivious state of mind, resistance? I mean, I know it's hard to put a blanket across the entire population. I just wonder day to day, though, are you feeling your encounters are with more people who are willing, or more people who are just not sure, or some outright blatant racist?
All the above. And I'm sure you're seeing the same emboldened revision, white supremacist actions, comments, racist actions, comments in this Trump era and beyond before. But and I wonder if the reason I am seeing more whites wanting to do white caucuses, more leaders asking me in with a colleague of color to do in-depth dismantling racism work for all of their staff. And I'm not talking knowledge. This is almost SJTI level of intensive self-work around internalized dominance, white culture, how it's showing up, white supremacist culture, folk of color, engaging with whites, and then their own healing work around internalized racism. So I'm seeing that, and I'm being asked to do that. And then I'm being asked, well, I chose to do some virtual courses in the fall and the spring around creating white accountability spaces, and they were full. The webinars I'm doing have several hundred people on them. So again, that's a drop in the bucket, but I do feel an energy around more whites who feel they're incapable. They're like, I don't know what to say or do. I'm seeing racism. I'm seeing the white supremacy culture, white culture dynamics, but I don't know what to do. That's the group, to be honest, that I think is an opportunity for the White Privilege Conference, as well as all of us in all of our roles, to deepen the capacity of the internal change agents who say they're doing it, might go to a workshop, might do a training, but they really day to day are still perpetuating urgency, top down, I'm right, either or, to some of those white supremacy culture characteristics, that Tema Okun, Kenneth Jones work. Just so many whites don't know. Like, I don't know how I'm always perpetuating white culture and privileging it. I'm farther than I was, but I still do. So I need whites to help me see what I don't see, recognize the racist behaviors I'm missing, find new ways to speak up, interrupt. So long way of saying, I'm finding more whites, and I'm finding more folk of color, multiracial folk, and indigenous folks are saying no more, enough. We are done. I'm finding folk of color who've been leading this racial justice work are exhausted, burned out, still doing their job plus, but I'm hearing more people say enough. We have to change our culture and our climate. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah, I wonder about everyday people, like you mentioned a plane ride, or, just bumping into someone at a grocery store. But even I think about at relatives, a group of relatives gathering, I'm just wondering, how do you explain the work of white people in today's society, 2020 and the next 25 years, to someone that I'm not saying they're resistant, they're willing to listen. And so I'm wondering, like, how, because you've mentioned white caucus, white supremacy culture, whiteness. I mean, how do you break that down into something that's manageable, digestible to someone that's said, oh my goodness, it's good to meet you. What do you do? And what's the work you think I need to do?
I'm envisioning some of those social gatherings that are not, you were frozen. I'm envisioning some of those moments of, I just roll it back really far. And I do start by asking who they are, how they're doing, kind of how's diversity in their organization. And so I'll probably come at it from what we're finding is we need all of our brilliance and talent in our organization, being innovative, serving clients, coming up with new products. And my experience is that most organizations have unintentionally created a space where most folks of color feel they're kind of in a box and they're not fully utilizing their brilliance. And so if we're really going to survive as organizations, much less as a country, we need to look at these, and I keep saying unintentional, ways that many folks by race, ethnicity, immigration, just don't feel they belong and are a part of. And that's not working. I might talk about what's in it for you. So if the financial doesn't work and keeping your company viable, your organization viable, then I might ask more questions about what's your organization like, and how much do you feel like you belong? And more than likely they'll say because of hierarchy or class background, or maybe they have a child with a disability, or so find when they're in a marginalized identity historically or now, and get their heart open. And then I might enter that way, and then bring race in, and then just talk about our responsibility and our privileged identities. But even then, I'm thinking about some family members in the extended family that would just shake their head, and they might say the right things, but then in another moment they say, maybe this COVID-19 is just culling the herd. That's a true quote. It's so oppressive. I just, actually, I felt my body just get so effing triggered. So there are people that I am not useful for, like that person. Most people that voted for the person in the White House, most of the people that still support him, my work is not useful for. But I can help folks who are daily working with people navigate when they feel triggered, and strategies to engage folks. I'm just looking at that malleable middle, those particularly white, quote, formally schooled, upper middle class white women, suburban, that if we can shift another 5% of those folks, we might have a chance of taking back the government. And then with this resurgence of, I think, this work around dismantling classism, fair wage, fair healthcare, there's something happening now in this pandemic that has, I believe, more and more people hearing the progressive voices. Not that the progressive voices are very good at racial justice. And I just have to believe that all of this is happening for a reason, that we're awakening enough and more so that dismantling racism, white supremacy, dismantling classism, we will get more progress in these next couple years before the stagnation resistance resurges.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned COVID-19, and I was going to ask about white people during this time, because I'm seeing some devastating reports and numbers around the disparities and the ways in which people of color communities are being devastated.
Decimated.
What I'm finding absent, again, is the presence of whiteness and white people. So asking you, I mean, what's the charge? What's the need? Where should be white people be present during this time, as we look at what seems to be the conversation about the most oppressed, but absent is the most privileged?
I've been holding open space called Community Connections. We've done 7 of them now, just Tuesdays and Fridays. Whoever wants to come, and the folks there, it's probably 3/4 to 2/3 white, several folk of color, all of them express outrage at the racial disparities and the class disparities that are being so crystal clear now, with all the cracks in societal institutions, as well as they are seeing in their communities and in their own organizations. Now, this is not everyday people, but these are folks that are working with everyday people, mostly in K-12, higher ed, nonprofits. They are not only finding a community, but we're also talking about strategies to use this time to pull people together. As I heard yesterday from someone, that the governor of Kentucky, a white Democrat, said, we know why we have these health disparities, because of the decades and centuries of unresolved social inequity. And so apparently he pulled together a task force to begin looking at policies, programs, systems to enter those cracks. And I'm thinking it's going to be mostly white people with some folk of color. I'm challenging all organizations to do the same thing. And I think this pandemic has awakened, again, enough of that middle management group and senior leaders who are getting the data about who are the folks without computers, who aren't getting fed, who have housing insecurity, who don't have internet. And they're seeing the race class cut of that particularly. And I think it's opening people's hearts as they personally are impacted by knowing someone who died or knowing someone that's on a ventilator. So this is an opportunity that I, unfortunately, with all this chaos and unprecedented, I do believe there's more people, particularly white, who are at home in their white collar quarantine, as someone called it, recognizing their privilege as family members are on the front lines in grocery stores, in healthcare, in delivery services, but they're sitting home because they have that privilege by class, hierarchical level, education status, and whiteness particularly. I think privilege is setting in as there's more and more stories of people at those front lines who are getting positive and then dying, and not just, quote, the people that many think are expendable in our nursing homes and long-term care. So I have hope. This is my 5th week of sheltering, so I didn't have this hope early. But I've been reaching out to enough folks and enough MSNBC that I have hope that white people are stepping up. And I'm doing everything I know how to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've been, living in the suburbs here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And what I realized most recently on our family walk, one, I was wondering, can I do this family walk by myself? Like, if my wife wasn't here, would I be safe in this neighborhood? That's the first thing I've been asking myself as I'm reflecting in this time. But secondly, though, what I want to ask you about is social distancing. What I'm realizing is it feels like white people have lived their lives around social distancing. That actually this time is strengthening the distance. It's expanding the distance, that people won't come out living 6 feet, they'll come out living 60 feet away. So what's your sense of the possible impact of this social distancing as it relates specifically to white people, as we look at possibly the ramifications of this shelter in place?
I haven't thought of it. I love it. I was still stuck on you walking by yourself, much less with a face covering device, and the danger you're putting yourself in, much less your son, because of us whites and our violence and the police. I join you. I know I personally have social distance while I've been hanging out with whites and some folks of color. I didn't, until Social Justice Training Institute, know what it felt like and meant to have intimate, authentic, real relationships, friendships, colleagues of color. I skimmed and stayed on the surface. So I say social distance by looking good, trying to be the good white, making sure the picture was there, my words were right, picture of you. So I don't think many of us whites know what intimate, real dialogue means, intimacy with people of color, but I don't think we know what it means with other whites, even in our own families. So whiteness, white culture has reinforced us to stay in our heads, not emotional, not in connection, to be right. And all of those, I think they're alcoholic behaviors, white cultural behaviors we got rewarded for, and those don't have intimacy and connection. So we've been social distancing all our lives and rewarded for it. I actually think we have sold our relationships and souls to have white privilege and access. Is it being reinforced? For sure. And could it be that teams are realizing, because whites can't just talk to the whites they're comfortable with, they're now having to engage in cross-race conversations and crisis. And I think more whites are seeing the talent and brilliance, because it's probably mostly the folks of color who are asking questions about, let's look at who's being underserved and who's been left behind, and how do we shift? And I think it's the folks of color, if we're really listening, who are leading equity inclusion efforts in a way that whites can't avoid. They can dismiss still, but they're in the conversations daily with their teams, I'm hearing, especially mid and senior leaders. And what I'm hearing from folk of color and white folk is they're doing virtual trainings at the organizational level. They're having 2 and 3 times the number of people attend. Same time slot, same day, but people have the time and maybe are yearning for connection. And in those workshops on Asian American hate crimes and what we need to do in our organization, and how do we recognize how to have microaggression-free virtual teams. I mean, just 2 of the topics that I know colleagues are doing. So I will be with you in the just the devastation of racism and white supremacy. And I'm hearing enough that keeps me getting up in the morning. And I'm seeing people tell me stories. One person told me a story. They're on a senior leadership team of a university. And the president said, I'm surprised by demographically how many of our white university. And so this person, white person, said, well, let me share you the data. And then they shared the data about food insecurity and housing insecurity. And so they're using these opportunities to educate leaders in ways that they've not had before, because I think there's an opening. I think many whites want to connect. They have a good heart, and they're overwhelmed with the pain and the devastation of this pandemic that is just illuminating so many other racist, classist dynamics. I'm not saying all, because the hate crimers, the Zoom bombers, the white supremacists are jumping in, anti-Semites, and that malleable middle. I believe in, Eddie.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I think I'm wondering about the future of this work. The work of social justice. I feel like 20 years ago, when I was arguing for workshops and conversations about white supremacy, I was ostracized. I had to fight to get space for this conversation. And it feels like the vast majority of people that were received were the people who were doing 101 diversity. Now, again, I'm not arguing that that's not needed, but I feel like there has to be some elevated levels of challenge around the work available in every space. And so I'm looking at what's happening now, and I'm wondering afterwards, will we be in a time where those of us who are wanting to do this work and talk about the devastating effects, the impact of white supremacy, its devastation on people of color, will be bringing the bad news, right? We're the ones who are upsetting the presentation by talking about the truth of what we're experiencing, what we're seeing. What's your sense of the future of the work? I mean, particularly as it relates to those of us who want to explore whiteness, white supremacy, white privilege. Do you feel like there's going to be more and more space for trainings around that? Or will we possibly bounce back 10 years, 15 years to Kumbaya Diversity 101?
Again, I haven't thought about it. I wonder if there will be a period where we're transitioning and there's going to be so much need for healing grief. So many folks experiencing deep illness in their families and friends and death. And jobs are going to be shifting. So many people have lost employment, and I don't know how quickly, if at all, some of these small businesses will bounce back. So there's so much grief and fear. And I still have folks who even in the first week, wanted to talk about how do we infuse an equity, inclusion, race, class lens as we are making these crisis decisions. So I believe, in my experience of the calls I've been on, that there will always be some, and I think that's going to expand, especially if we can maybe reshape how we do the work to really focus on how do we support organizations and change agents and leaders to look at their practices, policies, culture, not in a blame, shame, guilt, but what can we do now to make sure we're truly serving all, especially those unintentionally we created barriers for around race, class. Now, you keep noticing how much I'm bringing class in. For whites, I could be wrong, but I think we need to bring class in because that's going to be an entry point for most of the folk who are first generation white leaders and who grew up in working class poor neighborhoods. And so it might be a time to keep race centered, but even as I was unconsciously doing, bringing class in, because that's where so much pain is. And most families have folks, white families predominantly, who are in incredible pain from healthcare denial, class. So, my work is really, I do awareness, but I do practical. How do you change policies? How do you run white accountability spaces? I teach people to design and facilitate those foundational courses that really talk about oppression and liberation full breadth, because I think they need that first before they can do, hear someone like you around white supremacy, hear me around white supremacy. So I think it's critical we look at how do we develop the internal capacity. So can we change our work? Again, these are things I've been doing, and maybe they'll be useful more. Having people realize one person in every department that could be an inclusion partner, somebody that gets in-depth training. So it's no longer just speakers and HR trainings, but we develop people in each department to be that diversity change agent, to work with the leader with a deep race lens, class lens, and any other lens that particular department needs. That's the work I've been doing for years. I'm accelerating it even now in this pandemic. So I do wonder if that malleable middle of supervisors, managers are realizing they don't know how to create inclusive, high-performing teams. They don't know how to create an environment where everybody can really be in their full brilliance. And they don't call it white supremacist culture, capitalistic culture, male-dominated culture. They don't call it that. But do they need to in order to change it? So this might be controversial to a number of the listeners, but I want change. And if folks don't want me to talk about white supremacy culture, I'll talk about the characteristics of dominant culture, and we'll get to the same end. And then before we're done in the session, I'll say, Ann, have you seen this work by Kenneth Jones and Tema Okun? It's so powerful, white supremacy culture. So I will get it in. I just wonder if we need to meet people where they are in their fear, rage, anger, grief, complete chaos, instability. And I wonder if this is going to be a year plus till we get the vaccine, and meet people where they are, weave it in, and we can still talk about the same issues while we're building an internal capacity and keeping the folks who are the change agents nurtured, sustained, and learning. So I know somebody that's going to be pulling together some consultants to talk about what are we going to be doing and how can we support those same questions you're asking. Has me wonder, my guess is you're already thinking about, can the White Privilege Conference be bringing together some of the presenters to just do sustenance and community care and but a community conversation. And then how do we get some of our learnings and lessons out? So I don't know. I know that's what I'm doing, is I'm thinking about virtual conferences, and I'm putting more of my work virtually, and I'm in for whatever you need.
I appreciate that. I want to ask you about the next 10 years of Kathy Obear. What's on the horizon, what you're thinking about. But before that, I wanted to just see how Denver is doing, how y'all are doing there in Denver, and what you're seeing, feeling in reference to the area, the city, maybe even the state of Colorado when it comes to dealing with and handling COVID-19.
I just have this much of a perspective from what I've been reading and seeing. I have to say I was very excited to hear my governor a couple weeks ago be farther ahead than many governors about stay at home and the efforts. And when I look at the map yesterday, we're not the deep red of New York or the next layer, but we are a deep orange. So we have several hundred deaths. Last I heard, a good 1,000 of folks were in the hospital. I haven't seen that we have hit the downward peak. We're extended through the end of April to shelter, and I'm sure it'll be longer. And as I walk around my neighborhood, which is cross-class, cross-race, 10 to 15%, maybe 20 neighborhood planned. I see people out on their steps without masks. I see people walking in masks. And I see more people out greeting more people. So Denver, the folks who are already underserved and left behind, I read yesterday, similar to other areas, Blacks have died at twice the rates of whites. Blacks are hospitalized at twice the rates of whites. So we're having the same racist health disparities. What I haven't seen is around Latinx folks, because Colorado, as you know, has a huge Latinx population compared to African-American or Indigenous or Asian American. But I haven't seen that data, and that frightens me, because I do know Indigenous folk and Latinx folks are from what I've seen, having similar race disparities. I want it all out there. So that's what I know about Denver, as I see people in their own areas also working to serve food, food banks. The conflict center here with Beth Yohe's group is doing some great virtual work around conflict and COVID with a race lens. So I just have a sliver of understanding.
Yeah, and how are you doing? How are y'all doing there at the house in reference to week 5?
Daily, every time I talk to someone, I'm more and more aware of the incredible privilege I have from my intersecting identities of privilege as being white, upper middle class, doctorate. I could keep going. We are doing relatively well, actually really well. 5 weeks is beginning to wear because I love to travel and train, but I've been doing lots of virtual work that feels useful because I just have to be a service. That's just one of my drives. So we're doing well. My wife works with me in the business, and she's doing some great back end work, and we're getting along. And a friend started a spades tournament about 3-4 weeks ago. Never really played spades, but they let these white women in. And so while we lost the tournament last week, I'm hanging in there and building a different kind of community, learning spades. So twice a week, just finding ways to stay energized, aware, and still being ways to be of service now and in the future, while all my work has pretty much been canceled. So I don't know what 6 months, a year looks like for we entrepreneurs that have committed our lives to dismantling oppression and creating liberation. I don't know. And day to day, I can be in that roller coaster of everything will be good, trust God, do what the next thing in front of you. And then some moments are, we can pay the bills for a while, and there would come a time when I could imagine maybe not. So I do get into those fears of economic insecurity occasionally, even though over the years have been able to create a foundation that I am in a very different position than many people I know.
Yeah, and you mentioned your new book on the horizon. Are there some other things? Can you just give us a sense of the new book and possibly some other things you got cooking in the hopper for the future?
Cooking. I have found so many whites, particularly at the Social Justice Training Institute, that leave ready to committed to work with whites, but not yet having the tools or skills or capacity. And so just about a year ago, probably 6 months ago, I was in a space. I don't know what I'm going to do next because I'd written 3 books and done all this. And then I just had this whisper while I was showering, this is next. And so I have a real passion to work with whites who really want to deepen the capacity to create accountability space, work of internalized oppression and white supremacist attitudes. And then how do we create containers for whites of all readiness to show up and learn, and particularly those that are ready to become change agents in those organizations. So that's what I'm focused on, deepening the capacity of whites in organizations to convene white accountability spaces to get more whites at malleable middle, noticing racist microaggressions, speaking up, looking at their own behaviors, looking at their practices, culture. I believe it's possible, and we're doing it. Then my work developing these inclusion partners. I teach a course it'll start in August again. I've done that a number of times, and there's more organizations wondering about, can't bring speakers as much. How do we do something more virtual? And so that's always been virtual. And I'm wanting to just develop facilitators in general who do social justice work. Because again, people say, I took a master's course or I took a design course, but I mean, I used to teach 2-day train the trainers when I think of what more I could have done. So about a year ago, I put everything I know into a 24-week course, online, self-paced. So people that want to work virtually, and then people that want to stay current with me, I do free webinars probably 3, 4, 5 times a year. I have a couple coming up in May. So I don't know what my 10-year is, but I pray I will be healthy at 73, in 10 years, and I know as long as I can, I'll be doing this work. But 5 years ago, I had no idea I'd be writing books, doing the kind of development, coaching, leader coaching, train the train. I had no idea I'd be doing 5 years ago what I'm doing now. White supremacy, culture. You were talking about 20 years ago. It's just been the last few years that I've really, especially the last year, that I started to really see in me in the way I do the work. And if people know me, I probably a year ago wasn't using that language as consistently as I do now. So I plan to keep learning, and I have no idea what the universe has. But I envision 10, 12 more years of pretty active work doing this. And then even when I'm 75, I'll still be writing and coaching. And I just may not be traveling and lugging baggage around as much at 75. But who knows?
You never know.
I'm a pretty spry, healthy 63-year-old. Who knows?
Yeah, well, we definitely appreciate you, again, being a part of the WPC family, supporting me, especially when not all consultants were behind what I was doing in reference to the White Privilege Conference. And you have always been there. So I just want to appreciate you and SJTI and all the folks involved for all the work and support y'all have provided me, especially, but also the conference. We like to close out with a little fun question for our guests, and that is, what are you watching? Is there anything that you're watching, streaming, that you've learned from, or anything you would just recommend that just helps take you away, that you've enjoyed, that you want to recommend for folks? Because we're asking people to share some of that.
I would love to see a list. So 4 Weddings and a Funeral on Hulu is what we watch just to get a break. And there's good stuff, particularly on some race culture in there as well. We're watching The Little Fires Everywhere. So intense and such great work on race, class, and other issues, sexuality. There's so many other, but they're just not coming to me. And then when we're done and we need to just really transition to sleep, Friends usually pops on. And just the classism and racism and heterosexual, and I'm watching a good bit of MSNBC and CNN just to see, from a little different light, though they are more progressive-ish than they might have been.
Yeah. Well,
and then Little Women. Oh, wait. What's up next is Just Mercy.
Yes.
That's the next, Just Mercy, with Brian Stevenson's work.
Well, Kevin Jennings turned me on to this show that I've been sharing with people on Netflix, and it's called Unorthodox. It's just
good. We watched it.
Okay, great. So you're on that. Oh, that was just brilliant. Just brilliant. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll have to figure out another one that I've enjoyed that I can share with you that you haven't seen yet. But again, we appreciate you joining us and contributing, and always, especially, what I love about your work, Kathy, seriously, is you make it accessible to people who have resources, but also folks who may not be in a position to pay for it. And that's just a good model for those of us who are doing the work. And I've always appreciated that about you, and looking forward to being in partnership, collaboration till 73, 83. As long as you'll take me, we'll take you.
Bring it on. It'd be an honor, because without your early work, yes, I'm an SJTI, but white privilege in your work has been instrumental. And to go to those conferences has been one of the ways that has shaped me who I am. So always indebted to you, my friend.
All right. I appreciate you. Take care. Peace and love.
Back at you, my friend. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.